Hello Ag 1, we're going to try to do some woodshop safety. The reason we're doing this is because hopefully this summer we'll be able to get you guys in if you want to build your projects that we're missing out because of this quarantine. So I'm going to go over some shop safety with you. You have a worksheet you can fill out as we go along, and we'll see what we can do. So a couple things when you're working in the shop. First off, have to wear safety glasses at all times. Second, you have to have your hair tied back. And guys, that includes you that have long enough hair. Hair's got to be back. Okay? You also have to have correct footwear on. As long as they're shoes that aren't open-toed and they have backs on them and they aren't soft like your mocks, then they're going to be fine. Okay, now I know for some of you that have Mr. Pickett, he gets a lot more picky about things. Okay, I do allow rings, watches, but no necklaces, okay, and no real dangly earrings. All right? I don't ask you to tuck your shirt in like Mr. Pickett does as long as it's not open and isn't going to get caught in something. Okay, so I know those of you that have Mr. Pickett, you're probably thinking, well, that's not what he does. Understand, my shop, my rules, I'm a little more lenient than he is. So as long as you follow his rules, you're doing fine. Okay, there's things that you may do at home that you're not allowed to do here. So keep those in mind. My shop, my rules, follow my policies. Okay, so safety is always first. Glasses, hair, shoes. Okay. If you have any problems at any time, you need to make sure that you come to me. If you're not sure how a machine works, you're not comfortable operating it by yourself, something doesn't seem to be sounding right, acting right, make sure you come to me so that I can take care of the problem when you're out here in the shop. All right? So we're going to start today with the table saw. There's a couple terminologies I need to talk to you about. We're going to talk about how to operate this table saw. You'll have your note sheet that you can fill out as I go along, and I'm going to follow along to make sure that I cover everything that's on there. Okay? So first off, table saws can come a little different. I know this looks a little different than Mr. Pickett's, but they all operate basically the same. When we're going to be cutting on this, there are two types of cuts that you can do on a piece of wood. The most common cut that we do on the table saw is what we call a rip cut. And a rip cut means that we're going to be cutting with the wood grain. So the wood grain are these lines that go straight up and down. Okay, this is the only saw in the entire shop that we can do rip cuts on. So that's why this is the most common one we do on here. The other type of cut that we can do is what we call a cross cut. That's where we cut across the grain. The other saws in the shop can do cross cuts. This can too, but it's easier on the miter saw to do a cross cut. So we're going to start out with a rip cut on this machine. One thing you want to do before you make any cut is you want to inspect your wood to make sure that there are no nails, screws, staples, anything in that wood that could cause an interference with the blade. Now you'll notice in this piece of wood, there is an actual defect, okay? It's a split. And if we cut that and aren't careful, we can get what is called a kickback. A kickback is where the wood is going to come flying back at you for one reason or another. So what I'm gonna actually do is the split is right here. And so I'm going to rip this piece of wood right here to get rid of this split so we could use it in a project. Okay? So to do a rip cut, first thing is we need to set our blade height. Okay? Your blade, you want to have just enough to cut through your wood, but not too much. 1/4 inch is what we say for how high the blade should be above the wood. And that is about correct, the width of a tooth. Now you might say, how in the world do I adjust that? It should be basically set, you always want to check it. But to adjust it, what you're going to do is here in the front of the machine, there's a wheel with a lock knob. So first you want to unlock it, okay? And then this will wheel your blade up and down to the desired height that you need. And then lock it back in place again. There's another wheel on the other side of the machine that does the angle of the blade. And so we don't want to mess with that one because we want the angle of our blade to be 90 degrees straight up and down. So that's how you do the adjustment. It should be set, but always check it. So once we have that set, the other thing that we have to think about is where do I stand and where should I keep my fingers so that I keep all of them, okay? So on all machines, we have what we call a margin of safety. Margin of safety is how far should my fingers be from the blade. Each machine has a general rule of thumb. On the table saw, it's 4 inches. Now for some people, they might tell you 6. If you want to stay 6, that's great. Okay, but 4 is where at the least, the closest you can be. And the way I remember that is a table has 4 legs, so therefore a table saw has a margin of safety of 4 inches. Just an easy way for you to remember that. So when I'm looking on this table saw, basically what I'm looking at are these grooves that run right here. This is more than 4 inches, but as long as I keep my hands on either side of this groove, I'm going to be perfectly safe. The second thing is, where do I stand? Kickbacks occur when the wood and the blade get pinched, and then the blade is going to throw the wood back at you. So I don't want to stand right here. All right? I want to stand off to one of the sides. And my general rule of thumb and the easiest way to operate is when I am cross-cutting or I am ripping, I'm going to stand over here. The kickback zone is right here. And you'll notice the table saw is faced back. No one should be working back there. Okay, so if there is a kickback, hopefully you're out of the way and no one else is going to get hit either. All right? When I use push sticks, and we're going to talk about those here in a second. These are called push sticks. We use these if we have to cut when our fingers are going to be closer than 4 inches. It's kind of hard to use push sticks standing over here. So in this case, when I use push sticks, I step over here to the right, to the left. Okay? And I'll use my push sticks. That keeps me out of this kickback zone. Okay? So the answer on your paper is, where do I stand? I'm going to stand to the right, and less using push sticks than to the left. So stand to the right, and less using push sticks, stand to the left. So, blade height and where to stand. Now how to do the cut. This is what we call a rip fence. It's to be used on rip cuts. You don't just freehand this. And so what we're going to do is we're going to move this rip fence. We unlock it using this knob here. Please don't lock this knob as tight as you can get it. Snug it. It's operated by springs. If you do it too tight, you'll ruin the springs. Pull it up in order to unlock, and now the rip fence moves. There is a guide here that tells me how many inches is actually between the rip fence and the blade. This one is accurate, and the guide is actually right here. It's telling me right now where I have it set is 11 inches. So it's telling me right where it needs to be, okay? For this board, I want to cut this split off. So I'm going to look at where the split is, and I'm going to move my rip fence in and make sure I'm cutting off all of that wood that's not safe. I'm going to lock my rip fence back down, and it looks like it's going to cut at 6 1/4 inches. So the question is, do I need to have push sticks? No, but I might feel a little more comfortable having push sticks. So if I'm going to cut this without push sticks, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stand over here to the right. I'm going to put one hand up here at the top of the board, keeping my fingers within 4 inches. Another hand here on the back, and I'm going to turn the machine on and push the board all the way through. Okay? Keeping my fingers more than 4 inches away. I'm going to let go as the board gets there, keep one hand on it until my hand touches this guard here. I don't want to let go of the board too soon. If I let go of the board too soon, I will get a kickback. Okay? That's when I've seen most kickbacks happen, as students let go of the board too soon. So that's pretty easy to do. I'm going to show you how to make this cut actually with push sticks, because push sticks are a little tougher to use. So because I'm using push sticks, I'm going to stand on the left. I'm going to put one push stick over here to hold the board in, and one push stick back here to hold the weight down. And we're going to make this cut. Make sure your board is away from the saw blade when you start. Make sure no one's standing behind you. And we're going to start the machine. The on-off button's down here in the front. The on button is green. The off button is red. Okay, we ready? That piece of wood that's still on the table needs to be left there until the machine stops and comes to a complete stop. At which point, the person helping you, your tailor, your catcher, whatever you want to call them, can pull it out, okay? This machine has anti-kickback on it. You'll see these teeth right here. And so the board, when it's going through, should not kick back as long as these teeth catch it. So when you're pulling this board out, you want to pull it with the teeth so that you don't ruin those. So now you can see we have our board ripped. We don't have that split in there anymore, and this can be used for a project. Here's what we cut off. There's that split that we wouldn't want in our project anyway. Let me throw that away. So to rip, again, we use the rip fence. Use push sticks if you're going to be close or within 4 inches, and make sure that you're standing in the correct spot. Let's talk about a cross cut, okay? With a cross cut, we're going to go across the grain. So we're going to move the rip fence this way, okay? We're going to get our miter gauge, which is hanging on the back of the machine. This is a miter gauge. We're going to put it into this groove. It has a little wheel here. So make sure that wheel goes into that groove. Okay. We want to make sure that it's set at 90 degrees. This is how you adjust it. So this is not a handle. If I loosen this, that allows me to do my angles. We're going to do a straight cut. Okay. Again, make sure your board and your blade is only a 1/4 inch, just the teeth showing. I'm going to just cut this end off so I can lift up the guard. I can see where I want to cut, keeping my fingers still 4 inches away. I'm going to put a palm right here and my hand right here. Pull this away from the blade. And I'm going to pull these together as I cut. Notice I'm going to stand on the right-hand side because my kickback zone is going to be right here again, okay? Now the nice thing about standing on the right is if I would need to shut this machine off quickly, my knee can hit this off button. That's how it's designed as a safety feature. So I'm going to make my cross cut. Again, go all the way through until your hand touches. Turn the machine off. And wait. Once it comes to a complete stop, you can take your extra piece of wood and you can take your miter gauge and slide it back. And I've just made my cross cut. Okay? So for cross cuts, use the miter gauge. For rips, use the rip fence. And that should be all. It's a machine that can do about everything. All right, so I forgot something on the worksheet you need to answer. The question on the worksheet is, how many pieces of wood can I cut at one time? You can only cut one piece of wood. If you cut more than one, you have the chance of kickback just like you would with that split in the wood. So only one piece. If you want them to be exactly the same size, you just have to be good at measuring. The other question always comes up is, well, if I want this piece of wood to be perfectly straight, can I use these two together? Because this would be great. I could go like this. Everything's going to be perfect. I have it lined up. No, you cannot do that. Huge chance of kickback. Few instances you're allowed to, but everything we're doing in this shop, no. So you cannot use the rip fence and the miter gauge together. Thank you. Okay, so the second piece of equipment we're going to learn how to use is what we call a miter saw. A lot of you may have something similar at home that you use, a very common piece of equipment. You may not think it's that dangerous because you've all used it and it's at home, when in reality, this is one of our more dangerous pieces of equipment because you're comfortable using it, okay? This one is unique in that it's called a sliding miter. So it operates slightly different and can make a lot larger cut than what you have at home. Now, sometimes you're going to hear me call it a chop saw. That's just a slang term. So if you hear me say, hey, go use the chop saw, don't just wonder what in the heck I'm talking about. Understand that that means the same as a miter saw, okay? So when you go to operate this thing, the first thing you have to know how to do is how to unlock it, because the way it sits, you can't make a cut. Each brand is different with how you unlock them. On this one, which is a DeWalt, you're going to push down on the handle. You're going to come over here, and there's a silver button right here. that you're just going to pull out. Once you pull that out, you can now lift up the handle. When you're done operating the saw, I want you to lock it back. So when you're finished, you're going to push this down. You're going to just push that button back in again, and the saw is locked. Safety, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and unlock it. You'll notice that this machine can make this large of a cut, which is a lot bigger than most of your miter saws at home. So the sliding part of this is locked in the back. So if I look on the back of the machine, there's a black knob right here. This black knob, all you have to do is loosen. Once I do that, now my saw will slide back and forth. I don't want to use the sliding if I don't have to, but on the box projects that we're going to be building, you're going to be cutting pretty large pieces of wood, so you are going to be using the sliding part of it. When you're finished using, just like with the saw itself, I want you to lock this back so that it can't slide. Okay, so 2 safety features on this saw. If you look at your worksheet, the first question is margin of safety. Now this machine's great. It's what I call a dummy machine. You'll notice right here, there's a line, and it says no hands past this line. It has the same thing on the other side. Now that's actually a little further than what you technically need to be. The margin of safety on this one is 6 inches. What you're going to notice with all the machines is you're either going to have a 2-inch, a 4-inch, or a 6-inch margin of safety. The most dangerous machines are 6 inches. You might say, well, the table saw seemed a lot more dangerous than this, a lot harder to operate. What I want you to notice is as I push this machine down, notice what the guard is doing. And as I cut that piece of wood, look how much of that blade is exposed. So it might be easier to use in the table saw, but there's actually way more blade there that has the opportunity to cut a finger, an arm, whatever you have under there off. That's why the table saw is actually safer, because there's less blade showing when you make the cut. Important thing to remember, okay? So margin of safety is 6 inches, which is about right here on both of these. So as long as you can keep your hand back there, you're fine. Types of cuts. On this machine, it is a cross cut only. So we're only going to be going across the grain. And that's pretty easy to understand because most pieces of wood that you're cutting are going to be long, and so you're just going to be cutting the ends off of them. I have had a student do a rip cut on this machine before, and it results in a large kickback. Fortunately, the student wasn't hurt, but I was almost hurt because it shot the piece of board halfway across the room and landed right beside my head and put a dent in the bookshelf that was right next to me. So don't do rip cuts on this machine. So cross cuts are made. The question on sliding miter versus miter saw. The way that we operate this is the difference. So when I'm cutting this, this board is narrow enough I could get by without using the sliding part. And I can tell that because as I go down, I can see that the blade cuts all the way through the board. But to be a little safer and make it a little easier, I'm going to go ahead and use the sliding because it's right at the edge of it. So I'm going to undo my slider. And when I operate this and I cut, I want to pull the sliding miter out, cut down, push it back and make my cut, and then release it. We don't want to go down first and try to come back. That's not going to cut. You're going to get a kickback. So you always come out first, go down, push your cut through. So you want to write on your notes that you're going to push the saw into the wood. That's the difference. And again, just like the table saw, we only cut one piece of wood. If we try to cut more than one piece of wood on here, you're going to get a kickback because it's going to cut through the first piece. That first piece is going to get loose. As it starts to cut into the second piece, that first piece is going to come flying back at you. Okay? Again, check your wood. There is a little split here on the end, which I don't want that coming back and hitting me even though it's small. So we're going to either tear it off or we're going to cut beyond it. Everything else looks good on the wood. Okay? The way I hold this, you can operate this right or left-handed. Doesn't matter if you're a right-hand person or a left-hand person. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to take and I'm going to hold the wood with my left hand. I'm going to push in with my thumb and down with my fingers. I want to be careful that I don't put too much weight on the front or my board's going to go like this as I'm cutting. Okay? I want my force to be in and down, not down on the outside of it. So I'm going to go in and down. I'm going to use my right hand to operate it, and it really doesn't matter where I stand. I mean, I don't want to stand right in front of the blade. that's not comfortable anyway because of the adjustment. So I'm gonna stand off to the side. If I'm left-handed, I'm gonna hold it with my right hand. I'm gonna probably operate it with my left hand. So you can do it either way, it does not matter, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and cut off this board right here. I can lower this blade to see where it's actually gonna cut, because I wanna make sure that all that board, that ripped off piece of board is gone. The blade is 1/8 of an inch wide, so I need to take that into account when doing my cuts. If I have a line here I'm trying to cut on, I wanna make sure I'm cutting on the correct side of the line so my board's not 1/8 of an inch short, okay? So I have it lined up. That's gonna get rid of all that part of the board I wanna get rid of. Okay, I'm gonna move my hand back. I'm gonna hold my wood, gonna get myself comfortable. I'm gonna pull my saw out, gonna start it, go down and cut. All the way until it hits. Let go, and go like that, okay? There's my cut, all right? A lot of people, the mistake they make is they'll go down to cut, they won't go all the way down until it hits the bottom, and then it'll bounce back and you'll get some kickback. So whenever you're using this, take it all the way down before you start to push it back, okay? As soon as you get it all the way back, it's gonna stop at the back of the machine, let go, the engine brake will kick on and stop the saw blade. So there's your miter saw. It can do angled cuts. We won't do those, but as you take a look here at the saw, one thing you want to check is over here is our 0 marking. Last year, somebody had messed with this by accident and it was off by about 2 degrees, and so everybody's board was crooked. So you definitely want to check that. The way to fix it is you simply release this lock, and it's going to allow you to adjust wherever you want your cut, okay? So you want to make sure it is on 0 and it's locked back in place. We're all finished. So we're going to lock the sliding part, we're going to lock the saw part down, and then someone else can use the saw. All right, so the third machine we're going to talk about is the bandsaw, okay? This one has the smallest blade that we're going to be using. And you might say, well, that means it's the least dangerous. It is the least dangerous, but you have to think about it in that if I go into a butcher shop and I look at what they cut my steaks up with, this is what they actually use, okay? So yes, this will cut through a cow leg, it's also gonna cut through your fingers. And so just because I have a small blade, don't think that it's not gonna hurt you and can't cut a finger off, okay? Margin of safety, as I mentioned on the other machines, are either 2, 4, or 6. Because the blade is small, and because we're gonna drop our guard down and have very little amount of blade showing, our margin of safety on this machine is 2 inches, okay? So you can get fairly close to this blade and be fine. Just don't put your hands in direct line with it. Try to keep your hands off to the side in case as you're pushing your hand slips, you don't wanna accidentally go into the bandsaw. So on your notes, margin of safety, 2 inches. Where to stand? That's a great question. Let me open this up for you. This is called a bandsaw because it has a 96-inch blade that runs all the way around, okay? There is a possibility that this blade can break. So you have 96 inches of blade coming out of this machine. So you wanna make sure that you stand where if that happens, that blade's not gonna hit you. I have had the bandsaw blade break on me before, and I've had it break on different students. As long as you're standing where you need to stand, you have your guard set where you're supposed to, there's no problems whatsoever. So that blade is going in this direction. So if that blade breaks, it's going to continue to go in that direction. So in that case, we want to stand on the left of the blade. So if it breaks, it's going to come out, and usually it just stops, but I have seen it come out a couple inches and just hang out on the table. But you're away from the blade if that happens. So where to stand? You stand to the left. Blade guide height, okay? How far should my guard, be above the wood? Same as the table saw. It's going to be 1/4 of an inch, okay? Now, I believe Mr. Pickett has you set your finger here to set your height. I really don't want you doing that because your margin of safety is 2 inches when this machine is plugged in, whether it's on or off. I don't want your fingers within 2 inches of this blade if the machine is plugged in. So basically just think of it as 2 teeth. So to operate the guard on this one, I'm going to hold back here. Don't hold here. Right behind this is the blade, okay? I'm going to loosen the knob, and now this will move up and down, and I can set it right there for my height. And then I'm going to tighten my blade back, and I'm ready to go. Now, we have a different bandsaw over here. It's going to operate exactly the same as the other one. You're going to sand in the same place, everything's the same, with the exception of the guard adjusts just a little different. So on this one, you don't have to hold anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen this knob, and then I'm going to turn this one, which is going to move my guard up and down. So it is a lot easier than the other one for adjusting. When I get it to where I want it, I'm simply going to tighten it back, tighten this knob back, and now my guard is set. All right? It's the only difference in this machine. So we're going to stand on the left. We have our guard set at 1/4 of an inch. And on this machine, the purpose of this machine is to make curved cuts. It doesn't make straight cuts very well because you are guiding the board. There's no guides or guards or anything to help you out. So this is, okay, so we're going to make curved cuts on the bandsaw. So in order to do that, we can do outside curved cuts or we can do inside curved cuts. On the project that we're going to be building, we do inside curved cuts. Either one, it doesn't matter. The most important thing is that we do something called a relief cut before we begin to cut. That relief cut relieves the pressure on the blade to keep that blade from snapping. So if this curve is a steep curve, which this one is, I'm going to come in, and I don't have to draw them, but I'm going to make cuts first that are going to relieve the pressure on that curve. Then I'm going to come in and I'm going to make the cut. Now on the bandsaw, the machine only cuts as fast as you push the board. It's going to get noisy when I turn this on, so I want you to know that this does not cut if I don't push the board. So if I'm cutting crooked or something's not going right, I just need to quit pushing the board and it's going to stop, okay? So let's do a demonstration here. We ready? Keep your fingers off to the side. Notice that it doesn't cut if I don't push. The faster I push, the faster it cuts. I'm going to cut up to the line, and then I'm going to slowly back out. Everybody wants to back out real fast. You want to cut faster than you back out. Those are my relief cuts. Now I can either start cutting on this side or on this side. Doesn't matter. I can reach a hand around behind. Again, if it starts to go crooked, quit pushing. Once I get to that first relief cut, now I've just cut that section out. I can push the scrap away with my board and keep cutting. Now, if I start in here and I start going crooked, stop before you get that far, and I can help you readjust. Turn your machine off, wait for it to stop, push your pieces of wood away, and take them to the trash can. So those are called relief cuts. Okay, so I'm looking at my paper and I forgot letter E. How many pieces of wood can I cut at one time? Now the other two machines we said one. On the bandsaw, you can actually do more than one piece of wood as long as you tape them together. So when we do our box legs, we're going to tape our two legs together and we're going to cut the curve on them. That way the curve is exactly the same on both legs. So if you mess it up a little bit, it's messed up on both and it looks like you did it on purpose. So you can cut two if taped on the bandsaw. All right, so you probably won't have the opportunity to use the drill press, but it's here in the shop, and if you do get a chance, I want to make sure you know how to use it correctly. It's pretty easy to use if you've ever used a drill before. The most important thing is when you put a bit in, this is called the chuck, okay? And you want to make sure that you hand tighten it first around your drill bit. when you put your drill bit in, the drill bit has the flat area and the twist. You want to put the chuck not into the twisted area. So you're going to tighten it around the bit, making sure that it's square and not crooked like I just had it. Hanging off the back of the drill press is what we call the chuck key. This chuck key is going to tighten the holes in the chuck. And just like you tighten a tire onto a vehicle, you want to tighten all three, even though you won't get much tightening by the time you get to the third one. There's 3 ends that go down there that tighten around that bit, and that's what you're tightening. So this is spring loaded, so make sure you push it all the way in before you tighten it. So I'm going to tighten that one. I get quite a bit of tighten. And spin it around. Here's hole number 2. Notice I don't get much more on that. By the time I spin it around to hole number 3, it should be completely tight. Okay, the on-off switch is up here. Make sure it's straight. And then you can adjust your table to the height of your wood. Unlock it, and the table will wheel up or down to get you to however thick of a piece that you are going to be drilling through. Lock it back in place, and then if you have a small piece of wood, you definitely need to make sure you clamp it down. If it's just a big piece of wood and a little drill bit, you don't need to clamp it down, but anything bigger, you want to, because if not, a lot of times the bit will get stuck on the wood and start spinning it around and whack you in the thumbnail. From experience, I can tell you that. So that's the drill press. So you won't be using most of it. Margin of safety is 2 inches, and again, you tighten all 3 holes in the chuck. Now what you will be using are going to be either the corded or the cordless hand drills, all right? And so most of you have used a drill before, but some of you have not. So just real quick, on these drills, which are DeWalt's, by next year we'll probably have Milwaukee's, you have to know where forward and reverse is. So on these drills, your forward and reverse buttons are right here. Okay, that's how you're going to determine which direction the bit is going. These are hammer drills, so you want to make sure that it's on the twist bit, because if not, what you end up with is you end up with a sound like that and you just think you broke it. You didn't. It's for drilling through concrete. So to put a bit in, if it's closed, the chuck's closed. This is a keyless chuck, so I'm actually going to hold here and I'm going to pull the trigger in reverse. The faster I pull it, the faster it goes. And it's going to open up. I'm going to take my bit, or my countersink in this case, put it in there, put it back on forward, hold the chuck again until it's tightened. Snug it up. And that's how you put a bit in. When you actually do go to drill, you want to make sure you use both hands on the drill to keep the bits from breaking. So if I was to drill, which I'm not going to because there's no wood here, I'm going to have a hand here and a hand here to drill straight and to make sure I don't snap the bit. Okay, so this is a joiner. There's opportunities when we might be using the joiner. Usually when we use it, it's to get our pieces to fit together tightly. You might have cut a piece just a hair large, and so instead of going back to the table saw and cutting it, we're just going to join it off. So the purpose of the joiner is actually to joint or to smooth the edge of your board, not the end. This is called the end grain where the growth rings are, and we don't want to joint that. In order to clean that up, you just simply take it over to the miter saw, cut off what you need to, and you're good to go. It's a lot harder to clean this edge up, and so that's what the purpose of that joiner is. So maybe you burnt your wood on the table saw, or you just need to take a little bit off. That's what we're going to use the joiner for. So when you take a look at this joiner, first thing you need to know is margin of safety. Margin of safety is 6 inches. It doesn't look as scary, but when I move this guard out of the way, these are the blades right here. There's 3 of them. They're sharp. They can take wood off, and so you don't want your fingers anywhere near those. So 6 inches is your margin of safety up above the wood. So you're going to keep your hands on top of your wood when you push it through here to keep your 6-inch margin of safety. You can use push sticks if your board is shorter than that. The minimum board size, and by minimum board size we mean length of board. Board needs to be at least 12 inches. And the reason is I'm pushing this across. I want to be able to have enough room to be able to grab it on both sides and keep my fingers away from where I need to, and to have a good grasp on the board with both of my hands. So that's why the minimum length of the board is 12 inches. You can't use push sticks to overcome that. If it's shorter than that, you can't join it. Where do I stand? Well, there's really only one place it makes sense to stand, and that's right here. You might say, well, what is this, right, left, front, back? What is it? This is the back of the machine. There's the blades. So I am standing to the left-hand side. I'm not going to stand behind it. There's no way I can stand to the right. I'm not going to stand in front of it. So the answer that you're looking for is to the left. Okay, so to the left of the blade. So let's take a look at this. And the last question is, what do you use the joiner for? To smooth edges, and then what are you not allowed to joint? That end grain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at this board. You can see this end is not very nice. We're going to put a pencil mark on it so you can see what this machine does. First thing you want to do is make sure your height is good. There's a guide down here that's showing you how much is taking off, okay? And so you only want to take off a fraction of an inch. Now that's taken off like a 32nd. So I'm going to drop it just a little bit. So I'm going to loosen that. And you can see I can drop it clear down there. That would destroy your board. So I want to take off about a 1/16 of an inch. Tighten my table. Okay. Position my board so it's square. Make sure no one's behind me, because if I get a kickback, that's where it's going to go. Keep my fingers 6 inches away. And you can see that side that was all nasty looking that I put the pencil mark on is now smooth and clean. So that's the purpose of the joiner. All right, so the sander is another piece of equipment that you may not use on this project that we're going to be building in Ag 1, but it's something we have in the shop that I'd like you to be familiar with what it can do. So here we have the upright sander, and here we have the disc sander. They basically do the same thing. Usually there's a coarser sandpaper on the disc and usually a finer on the upright. In this case, they both have the same on it. So what these are going to do is these are going to sand outside curves. Okay, so your project has no outside curves on it. If you have a rough cut here, don't try to sand it square. That's what the miter saw is for. If you have that bad edge, don't try to sand it. That's what the joiner is for. But if you're doing any other projects, this is what you would use it for. You do have to be careful. When I turn this on, both sanders turn on. So don't lay your project or have a friend leaning up against there and turn on the machine, because both of these are going to come. So the other thing you have to be aware of when you turn this machine on is on the disc sander, the disc is going a certain direction. This machine is nice because it tells you what direction the disc is going. It's going in that direction. So when I sand on here, I always want to sand on the downward side. So the downward side is on the right-hand side on this machine. And it might be different on a different machine. Some machines, the downward side's on the other side. So you always have to look at the direction that the disc is spinning. So when I sand, I'm going to sand over here. If I try to sand on the upward side, it's simply going to lift my wood up, and that's not going to help your sanding any. So on the downward side, it keeps it up against the table, and that's what you want. On the upright sander, you don't have to worry about it. It's always going down. Okay, so it just depends which one you want to use. Now you want to be careful because this sander takes off a lot of material. And if you're not paying attention, you're going to ruin whatever it is that you're sanding. So let me show you how it works. 2-inch margin of safety, by the way. Turn it on. Notice both of them come on. Harder I push, the faster it's going to sand. So if I just want to round this edge off, I can do that. But if I'm not paying attention, you can see that it can very quickly destroy your project. We also have what's known as a spindle sander that can sand inside curves. We don't have a good one here in the shop, so we won't be using it on our projects. But to sand this type of curve, we couldn't use the upright sander. We'd have to use the spindle sander. And if you want to get a picture of the spindle sander over there, it's called a spindle sander because there's a spindle on it that you would sand with. And that's all. All right, so the last thing you're going to be using in the shop is a router. Routers can come in a lot of different shapes and forms. There's even router tables. This is one of them that most of the students like to use. It's just a skill. So each router that I have is going to work slightly different, but they all have the same basis. So you might say, well, what in the world is the purpose of a router? The purpose of a router is to put a fancy edge on a project. So this board right here has been routed, and you can see that the edge is not square like what we're normally used to seeing. So on your project, you're going to get to choose what you want your edge to look like. I have a bunch of different router bits. The router bits that you're going to be looking at are going to be the ones with the wheel here, okay? These are the router bits that will run along the edge of the board and will put a design. Now this one you don't want on the edge of your project. That's going to be for doing different types of projects. But this is what we call a roundover bit. This is what we call a cove bit, and I have lots of others in the tool room, but these are two bits that will work very well on your projects. So let's say we want to use this roundover bit. Be careful, these edges are very, very sharp. They're going to be cutting wood. Number one thing, whenever you work on any piece of equipment, so if I'm putting a bit into a router, if I'm going to be changing the blade on something, if I'm going to be working on the table saw, the number one thing I need to remember is always to have it unplugged. There's really no margin of safety on this because you're holding onto the handles when you operate it. But with the other equipment, there is a margin of safety. So if I'm touching, I'm anywhere near that blade, I need to have it unplugged. So in this case, I'm putting a bit in, my router's unplugged. So to put a bit in, I'm going to take the bit I want, I'm going to put it into the chuck there. Push it all the way down. Later I can adjust the table, okay? There's a lock on this one right here that's going to lock the shaft. So I need to lock it, and we always have to remember righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. Okay, now it's completely locked. I'm going to finger tighten it, and then I'm going to take my wrench, and I'm going to tighten this almost as tight as I can get it. Don't make it as tight as you can get it, or we'll have a hard time taking it off. Okay, so there's righty-tighty. We've just tightened that bit in there. Let go of my lock button. Okay, now we have to look at the depth of our router bit. It's going to cut at the height of the table. So actually that depth isn't too bad. If I want to change it on this machine, I'm going to loosen the lock, and I'm going to spin the adjustment that's going to raise and lower the table to get the height I want. So that's going to take off a lot more wood. If I take it up, it's going to take off a lot less. When I get it where I want it, I'm going to lock it back in place. You always want to use your router on a scrap piece of wood before you use it on your good piece of wood first. The reason being is if you don't have your bit set right, you don't want to ruin your good piece of wood and have to start over again. So once I have everything set, I'm going to clear my table. I can plug my router in. I want to make sure that my wood is completely clamped down. These are wood clamps, and usually what we use to clamp the wood down. The secret to these, to get them to square, is to take both of them, and this is going to make it bigger, and this is going to make it smaller. Just don't whack yourself in the face when you're doing this, okay? Once you get it close to where it needs to be, then you use just one of the handles. Make sure the clamps aren't close to the wood or you won't be able to router. Make sure they're off to the side, and you have the wood clamped down. Ready to go. Make sure your cord's out of the way so you don't router it. Okay. Most important thing is don't allow the router to tip, and don't start it when it's up against the wood. So if I come up to you and I say back away from the wood, don't just step away like this, okay? What I'm asking you to do is to pull the router away from the wood so when you start it, it doesn't ruin the bit or make a really terrible noise and cut your wood up. So you want your bit to be away from the wood. The bit will only go in far as that little round thing on the bottom, so you don't have to worry about it ruining your project. On-off switch is right here on this machine. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to back away from the wood. I'm going to turn it on. I can router either direction, okay? One way will kick, one way won't. That way's kicking. When you're done, turn it off and wait for it to come to a complete stop. If I pick this up right now, the shaft is still spinning, and a lot of people will pick it up and turn it right into their stomach. That's not safe at all. Wait until it comes to a complete stop, then you can put it on the table, upside down, so it doesn't hurt the bit. And you can see, when you take a look at your project, loosen your clamps just by loosening one of them. Don't let it drop to the ground. That I now have a clean, fancy edge on my project. And again, you can pick whichever design you want. When you're done, you're just going to do the opposite with the bit. You're going to unplug it first. You're going to lock your shaft. Now we're going to go lefty-loosey. Put that on the shaft. Loosen it just enough to get the bit out.